"Follow me," she whispered, and her voice cracked on the second word, barely louder than the wind screaming outside. And she was bleeding, she was frozen, and she was looking straight at Cole Mercer like he was the last solid thing left in the world. Cole had faced down rival clubs, corrupt cops, and men with guns pointed at his chest. But nothing in 30 years, on the road, had prepared him for the look in that young woman's eyes, the kind of look that doesn't ask for rescue. It asks for someone to walk into the dark beside you. Any night, 170 bikers rode into the worst blizzard Montana had seen in a decade. And what they found buried under that mountain was never supposed to see the light of day. Ponson, before we go any further, if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button and drop your city in the comments below. And I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's go back to that night. The storm had been building since noon. By 8 o'clock that evening, the roads through the northern Montana mountains were completely swallowed. Visibility had dropped to near zero. The temperature outside the Hells Angels clubhouse had fallen to -22. And the wind coming off the peaks was the kind of wind that didn't gust, it pressed. It leaned against you like something alive and patient, something that had all the time in the world and knew it. Inside, it was warm, loud, and the smell of engine oil, coffee, and wood smoke had soaked into every wall, every beam, every crack in the floorboards over the years. The clubhouse sat high in the foothills outside, a small town called Gray Haven, population just over 400 fewer in winter, when the roads made even a grocery run feel like an expedition. It wasn't a glamorous building, it was practical, solid, and built by men who measured everything by whether it would hold when tested. 170 members of the chapter were gathered there that night, which was already unusual. And the annual winter supply run was their largest coordinated operation of the year, and preparation always brought the full roster together. Any tables along the far wall were covered in inventory lists, canned goods, any medical supplies, and baby formula, and blankets, insulin, any water purification tablets. And the men around those tables weren't talking about themselves. They were talking about which families hadn't been reached yet, and which roads were the worst, which delivery stop needed 2 trucks instead of 1 because the access trail was too narrow for a full rig. Cole Mercer moved through the room the way a man moves when he doesn't need to announce himself. He was 48 years old, with gray streaking through dark hair and a face that showed every winter he'd spent in these mountains. And not handsome in a conventional way, formidable, the kind of face that made strangers instinctively step slightly to the side when he passed. Not from fear exactly, from recognition. The way you step aside for something that clearly knows where it's going. He'd been president of the chapter for 19 years. In that time, it had overseen more than 300 supply runs, mediated disputes between ranching families and mining crews, helped rebuild 3 homes after fires, and buried 6 members. He didn't talk much about any of it. Men who'd been riding with him for decades sometimes said that Cole's silence was the loudest thing about him, that when he stopped talking and just looked at you, and you understood more from that look than from an hour of conversation with anyone else. Second in command, a man named Birch, was leaning over the eastern route maps when Cole walked up beside him. "Weather's getting worse than they called," Birch said without looking up. He was 39, thick through the chest and shoulders, with a voice that always sounded like gravel being poured down a metal chute. "If it keeps going like this, we might have to push the northern drops to tomorrow." "And which families are on the northern route?" Cole asked. "The Hendersons, old man Briley, and the Vasquez family with the new baby, and the Cutler twins, they're both in their 80s now." Any road up to the Cutlers hasn't been plowed since the 14th. And Cole thought about this. The 14th was 11 days ago. You don't push to tomorrow, he said. Birch didn't argue. He'd known Cole long enough to understand that this wasn't stubbornness. It was arithmetic. Two people in their 80s, 11 days without a plowed road, -22 outside. And that math only goes one direction. All right, Birch said. And we'll take the long way around through Elk Fork Road. It'll add 2 hours, but it stays lower on the ridge. That works. Cole was reaching for the map to trace the alternate route when the front door burst open. It didn't open the way doors open when someone knocks and waits and turns the handle carefully. Open the way doors open when the person on the other side has been fighting the storm for so long that the warmth and light on the other side feel like a hallucination they're throwing themselves toward. A woman came through the door and hit the floor, not stumbled, not lost her footing. She collapsed, knees first, then hands, then her whole body, folding sideways onto the wooden floor of the entryway, like a person whose body had simply spent everything it had and was now presenting the bill. And for exactly 1 second, the entire room went quiet. And then Cole was moving. He crossed the distance between the map table and the front door in about 4 strides, which people who saw it later said didn't look like running. It looked like the room rearranged itself to put him where he needed to be. He dropped to one knee beside her, his hands already moving to check her pulse at the throat before he'd consciously decided to do it. She was young, early 20s maybe, blonde hair matted flat and frozen against her face. A winter coat that had been decent once, but was now soaked through, the insulation compressed and useless. And her lips had gone the grayish blue that meant she'd been outside in that temperature for a very long time. And hands were the worst. The left hand was clutched around something, a bag or a book or something rectangular. And the grip had locked up so completely that Cole could see the tendons standing out along her forearm, even through the wet sleeve of her coat. And she was conscious, barely. And her eyes opened and found his face. And for a moment, she just looked at him with the strange, detached focus of someone whose body is so cold that the brain has retreated somewhere interior and quiet and is just observing things from a distance. "Get blankets," Cole said, loud enough to carry through the room. And level enough not to communicate panic. "Get hot water. And don't make it boiling warm. And someone get the first aid kit from the back storage room, not the little one by the bar, the full kit." People moved. That's what happened in that room. When Cole spoke, people moved. He looked back at her. She was still watching him. "And inside," he said, directly, quietly, just to her. "And you're safe. Can you tell me your name?" Her mouth moved. He leaned closer. "Emily," she said. The word came out as a sound more than a word, barely shaped by lips that had almost stopped working. "Emily." He said it back to her the way you repeat a name to make it real. "Right, Emily, I'm Cole. You're at the Hells Angels clubhouse outside Greyhaven. And do you understand me?" Her eyes blew. He could see them clearly now, the kind of dark blue that looks almost gray in low light, sharpened slightly. Like something came back online. "Cole Mercer," she said. It wasn't a question. He held her gaze. Yeah, something moved across her face. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than relief. And more like recognition. Like she'd been handed the answer to a question she'd been carrying for a very long time, and now that she had it, she didn't know what to do with herself. "My father," she started. "Not yet," Cole said. "Warm first. And then talk after." She shook her head, a small, stubborn movement that probably cost her a significant amount of the energy she didn't have. And her hand tightened around whatever she was clutching. "He said, my father said, find Cole Mercer." Her voice was gaining the faintest shape now. still barely above a whisper, still cracking at the edges. He said you were. He said you would. She stopped and swallowed. Tried again. Follow me, she whispered. Please. Cole looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked up at Birch, who had moved to stand just behind him. And Birch met his eyes and said nothing, but his expression said, I know. I'm already thinking the same thing you are. Let's get her warm, Cole said. And somebody lock that front door back. We don't need this whole storm in here. Took 40 minutes to get Emily Carter stabilized enough to talk. Margaret, who handled medical for the chapter and had nursing training from a previous life, and supervised the warming process with the brisk authority of someone who'd done this before and knew that warmth applied too fast could be as dangerous as the cold itself. And no hot water bottles against the skin, layers added gradually. Warm fluids, sipped slowly. Emily sat wrapped in 3 wool blankets in a chair pulled close to the wood stove in the back room, both hands curled around a mug of something warm. And she answered Cole's questions with the careful precision of someone who has already decided exactly how much she trusts the person she's talking to and is now operating entirely within that decision. Her name was Emily Carter, 22 years old. She'd driven up from Billings 3 days ago. With the storm, she abandoned her car when it slid off the road about 10 miles back and walked the rest of the way. In 10 miles, Birch said from the doorway. He said it flat. And no inflection, just the number. Emily looked at him without flinching. Took me most of the day. Cole watched her. He'd been around enough people in crisis to know how to read the difference between someone who was dramatizing and someone who was just telling you what happened. Emily Carter was just telling him what happened. Your father, he said. Tell me about your father. She set down the mug. Her name was Thomas Carter. Retired, but still active. That was how she described him. He'd spent 20 years as an environmental investigator, the kind who didn't work for big agencies or corporations, but for the families and small communities that got ground up between those institutions when they collided. Consulted for 3 different federal investigations over his career. He knew how to read environmental impact reports, the way other people read menus, quickly, completely, knowing exactly what wasn't on the page and why. 12 days ago, Thomas Carter had driven north toward the mountains outside Greyhaven. He'd been investigating, at his own initiative and expense, a series of land transactions that had 23 families losing their properties over the past 4 years. And the official story, Emily said, was that the land was contaminated. And there'd been some kind of industrial runoff from an old mining operation. And the families were told their properties were a health hazard. And they were offered compensation, not great compensation, not what the land was actually worth, but enough that people who were already scared and being told they were living on poisoned ground decided to take it and go. And who was behind the mining operation? Cole asked. North Valley Resources. She said the name without emotion. The way you say the name of a disease. They're the biggest extraction company operating in this part of Montana. And they've got contracts with 3 county governments, 2 state departments, and at least 1 federal agency. And their CEO has his photo on the wall of the governor's office. And Cole nodded slowly. He knew the name. And most people in this part of Montana knew the name it was on equipment, on road signs near mine sites, on the plaques outside county commissioner offices where donations had been made and relationships had been built over years. And your father thought the contamination was manufactured, Cole said. Not a question. He didn't think it. Proved it. She reached for the leather notebook. She'd released it from her grip when Margaret had worked her hands loose, but she'd kept it within reach, and now she put her palm flat on the cover like she was steadying something. In the original soil samples, the ones that actually showed contamination, they were taken from a completely different location and filed under the coordinates of the family properties. The reports were swapped. The land those families were pushed off of was never contaminated. It was land that North Valley wanted. It was land that sat on top of a mineral deposit that the geological surveys they'd done quietly showed was worth somewhere between $40 and $80 million. The room was quiet. Birch shifted in the doorway. 23 families, he said. Three, Emily confirmed. Most of them had been on that land for 2 or 3 generations. In family, the Monroes, they'd had their ranch since 1904. What happened to your father? Cole asked. Emily looked at the notebook. And for a moment she didn't answer. And Cole understood that the moment wasn't hesitation. It was the pause of someone who has been living with something terrible for long enough that speaking it aloud is its own particular kind of ordeal. He called me 12 days ago, she said. He said he'd found the final piece. The original survey documents the real ones, not the filed versions, and a set of internal communications from North Valley that laid out the whole scheme. He said he was driving to meet someone, he didn't tell me who, and that if he wasn't back in contact within 48 hours, I should go to the authorities. And you went to the authorities, Cole said. I went to the county sheriff's office. She looked directly at Cole. The deputy I spoke to took down my information and said someone would follow up. And the next day, the sheriff himself called me. He told me that my father had a history of making accusations without evidence, that he'd been investigated before and cleared, and that if I kept pursuing this, I might be putting myself in a difficult situation. She paused. Used those exact words, a difficult situation. What did you do? I went home. She said it without apology or shame. I was scared. I didn't know who to trust. And then that night, someone broke into my apartment. And the air in the room changed. They didn't take anything obvious, she continued. I went through my things carefully, but I could tell someone had been through them. In my laptop, I'd had a folder of documents my father had emailed me, scans of some of the preliminary evidence, and when I turned it on, the folder was gone. Not deleted, gone, like it had never existed. Did they get everything? Cole asked. Emily put her hand on the notebook again. They didn't get this. My father sent it physical. Old school. He mailed it to me 3 days before he disappeared, and when it arrived, I didn't even know what it was until he called and told me. He'd put it in the bottom of a box of old textbooks in my closet. Whoever searched my place missed it. Birch had moved fully into the room now. Stood against the wall with his arms crossed, and Cole could read his expression well enough to know he was doing the same thing. Cole was measuring the story against everything he knew about how the world worked, looking for the place where it stopped adding up. It kept adding up. And your father told you to come here specifically, Cole said. Not to a newspaper, not to a federal agency, here. Emily nodded. He said these were his words. I've been turning them over in my head for 10 days, said. The people with power will protect each other. And the people without power need someone who isn't afraid of the people with power. And find Cole Mercer. He is the only man I know who will choose the truth over comfort. And she said the last sentence looking directly at Cole. And there was something in the way she delivered it that made clear she was also, in that moment, asking the question her father couldn't ask, is that still true? And you still that man? And Cole held her gaze for a moment longer than necessary. And he looked down at the notebook. Can I? He asked. And she slid it toward him. He opened it carefully. Inside, in a handwriting that was precise and slightly cramped, a scientist handwriting, a man trained to be exact, were pages of notes and coordinates, names, dates, and at the back, deep and carefully folded. Inigo, what appeared to be a photocopy of a document with an official-looking header that Cole couldn't read from this angle. In the inside front cover, in it written in a different pen, heavier pressure in the way you write when you want something to survive. Thomas Carter had written 4 lines. And the truth is buried where nobody thinks to look. The evidence is at the facility. And the facility is real. My daughter can walk you to the door. And Cole read it 3 times. Then he closed the notebook and looked at Emily. In the facility, he said. You know where it is? He gave me coordinates, she said. And before he disappeared, said if he went quiet, the coordinates would tell me where he'd gone. And I've had them memorized since the day he called. Have you been to the location? No, I came straight here. Cole nodded. He was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, not stalling, but the particular silence of a man who is deciding something quickly and wants to decide it fully before he speaks it. And all right, he said, stay here, rest. Let Margaret check you over again. He picked up the notebook, looked at Emily, and waited. And she looked back at him. Then she gave a small nod, a letting go gesture, a here it is movement, and said, I walked 10 miles in a blizzard to bring that to you. No. Cole stood. I'm going to make sure that wasn't for nothing. He gathered the chapter 20 minutes later. Not formally, there was no stage, no podium, no ritual of it. He just walked out into the main room and people turned toward him because that's what happened. When Cole Mercer entered a space with something to say. He told them what Emily had told him. All of it. Straight. No editorializing, no inflection, designed to provoke a particular response. And just the story as she'd given it to him, with the same quiet matter-of-factness she'd used telling it. When he finished, the room was still. A thin, Denny Chuck, who was 51 and had been in the chapter since Reagan's first term, said, and the sheriff called earlier. And Cole looked at him. Yeah, Denny said. About 10 minutes before the girl came through the door. And I forgot to mention it. Figured it was about road conditions. He paused. He said the mountain pass was closed due to avalanche risk. And he said we should postpone the supply run until the storm broke. Was there an avalanche warning on the weather service? Birch asked. And he shook his head. I checked when he called. Nothing. He figured he had information we didn't. Different sources. And Cole thought about this. He thought about the timing the sheriff's call coming 10 minutes before Emily collapsed through the door. He thought about a young woman who had walked 10 miles through negative 22-degree weather because someone had broken into her home and because the person who was supposed to protect her had instead warned her to stay quiet. And the sheriff wanted us off that mountain before she got here, Cole said. And nobody in the room disputed this, which means, Birch said slowly, that someone knew she was coming. And someone knew where she was going, or they knew she'd been tracked as far as Greyhaven, and they were cutting off the most likely place she'd end up. Either way, Birch said, they wanted the road closed. And Cole looked around the room. 170 faces, and who ranged in age from 23 to 67. Men who had made this ride every year for 19 years without once treating it as optional. Men who had carried insulin through 3-foot snowdrifts because there was an old man up on a ridge who needed it and wasn't going to come down to meet them. He did not make a speech. He did not try to inspire them. He simply said, I'm going up that mountain tonight. I'm not ordering anyone to come with me. But I want to be clear about what I think is happening. A man is missing. We have reason to believe he's alive. And the people who made him disappear are actively trying to stop anyone from looking for him. He paused. Anyone who wants to stay back and run the original supply route, the families on the northern route still need their deliveries. And that's not a lesser thing. That's the same thing. Stop talking. For a moment, nothing happened. Birch walked over to where his jacket hung and put it on. And then Denny, Chuck, and 17 others in quick succession, overlapping, and people reaching for gear, and people moving to bikes and trucks, and people pulling on helmets and gloves. And within 8 minutes, and without a count, and without a formal poll, and without a single speech about brotherhood or duty or what it meant to be who they were, every person in the room, except for 6 who volunteered to run the northern supply route, had suited up and was heading for the door. Any 164 people, and plus Emily Carter, who had emerged from the back room wearing borrowed thermal gear, 2 sizes too large, and her own frozen boots, which Margaret had dried out as best she could, and standing near the door with the leather notebook tucked under her arm. Cole looked at her. "You should stay," he said. "You've been through enough tonight already." "And those are my father's coordinates," she said. "And he said I could walk you to the door." Cole considered arguing. Then he decided against it, on the grounds that Emily Carter had already demonstrated fairly clearly what she was willing to walk through to get where she needed to go. "And stay close to Birch," he said. "Don't drift back in the convoy." "It won't. If anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately." "He will. And when we find your father," he said it as a win, deliberately, watching her face, "let the medic get to him first, before you do anything else." Something shifted behind Emily's eyes. The particular combination of terror and hope and desperate want that lives in a person who has been told a loved one might be alive when they'd been preparing themselves for the other possibility. "Okay," she said, and the word came out small, then steadier. "Okay." And Cole nodded. He turned toward the door. Outside, 164 motorcycles and trucks were forming up in the lot, engines turning over, lights cutting pale tunnels through the blizzard. And the storm had not eased. If anything, it had deepened the kind of deep winter storm that doesn't peak and recede, but simply settles in, patient and absolute, like it intends to stay. And Cole stood in the doorway for a moment, not looking at the storm. He was thinking about a man named Thomas Carter, who had believed the truth was worth enough to disappear for. Was he thinking about a daughter who had walked 10 miles in the dark because she'd been told there was one man who might actually do something? He was thinking about how fear works, how it travels, and how it calculates, and how the people who had arranged all of this had made a very careful set of calculations about who would and would not push back, and about what was and was not worth the risk of fighting. He was thinking that every one of those calculations had failed to account for 164 people who didn't need a reason beyond the one standing in the doorway behind him in borrowed thermal gear, holding a dead man's notebook. And he walked out into the blizzard, and the convoy followed. And the convoy had been moving for 20 minutes when the first radio died. Not static, not interference. It just stopped mid-transmission, mid-word, like someone had reached into the signal and squeezed it shut. And Birch keyed his handset twice, and it nothing. Tried the backup channel, and it got nothing there either, and pulled up beside Cole's truck at the next wide point in the road. In both channels, Birch said through the window, "Dead." And Cole didn't look surprised. He looked like a man who had already begun to suspect this and was now simply receiving confirmation. "How many rigs have CB backup?" "Maybe 30. The rest are on the same system. Tell the ones with CB to spread through the convoy. In the front, middle, back, everyone else rides on visual. Keep the vehicle ahead in sight at all times. If someone loses contact, they stop and wait." Birch was already moving before Cole finished the sentence. Emily sat in the passenger seat of Cole's truck, the notebook pressed flat against her thighs. And she'd heard everything. "They're jamming it," she said. And then, probably, they knew we were coming. They knew something was coming, Cole said. Indisco. Or they were already running interference up here before we left. Either way, he glanced at her. It doesn't change anything. It should scare you. It does, he said simply. Fear's not the problem. And fear's useful. The problem is when you let it make the decision for you. Emily looked at him for a moment. Then she looked back at the dark road ahead, where headlights were already beginning their slow negotiation with the storm. And my father said something like that once, she said. Cole didn't ask what, he just drove. And the mountain road climbed in long switchbacks, and at this hour, in this weather, every turn required a kind of concentrated trust. Trust in the truck's weight, and trust in the tires. And trust in the 31 years of Montana winters that told Cole's hands exactly how much to give and when to hold. And behind them, the convoy moved with surprising discipline. These were not men who'd been trained in convoy protocols by any military or law enforcement body. They developed their own version of it over decade of collective experience, and it showed vehicles maintaining spacing and steadies, lights, and nobody pushing too close behind the vehicle ahead. About 8 miles in, Denny Chuck's voice crackled through the CB. In Cole, you copy. Got a truck pulled sideways about 50 yards behind the tree line on the east side. And no lights. Engines cold, our headlights didn't even get a shine off the exhaust. It's been there a while. Cole's jaw tightened. Make and model? Can't tell from here. It's dark-colored, big. Could be a work truck. Leave it. Don't stop to investigate. Log the position and keep moving. And copy that. Emily had heard it all. She said nothing for a moment. And someone's watching the road. Looks that way. And how many people do you think they have up here? Don't know. It doesn't matter. She turned to look at him. How can it not matter? Because I've got 164 people behind me, Cole said. And whatever they've got up here, they didn't plan for that number. People who plan ambushes plan for small groups. They plan for one person driving up alone, one person who can be stopped quietly and turned around, or worse. They didn't plan for a convoy that takes 15 minutes to pass a fixed point. He paused. That's the only math that matters right now. Emily absorbed this. And she looked out the window into the dark and the snow. Believed someone would come, she said, and her voice had gone quieter. And the statement wasn't really for Cole. It was more like something she was testing the weight of something she'd been telling herself for 12 days to keep moving and was now, for the first time, starting to actually believe. He wrote that in the notebook. Someone will come. I thought he wrote it to make himself feel better. Maybe he did, Cole said. Doesn't make it wrong. The CB crackled again. This time it was a man named Rusty, who was running rear security near the back of the convoy. In Cole, we've got a vehicle behind us, single set of headlights. They've been back there since the last switchback, but they're not gaining, and they're not falling back. And just pacing us. How far back? Quarter mile, maybe. And could be a civilian who doesn't know any better. Could be something else. Keep watching it. Don't slow down, don't change speed. If they make a move, you tell me. Copy. Birch was back beside the truck window. Count at least 2 stationary observation points, he said. In truck, Denny spotted, and something on the ridge. Marcus thought he saw a light up there before the clouds moved back in. Be nothing. Could be someone with a radio and a view of the whole road. If they've got eyes on the ridge, Cole said, they already know we're not stopping. Yeah. Birch looked at him steadily. They know, so what's the move if they try to close the road? And we document everything. Every vehicle, every position, every timestamp. Everything that happens tonight goes out on record. And if they don't care about that, If they think they can. And they miscounted us, Cole said, and they'll figure that out shortly. And Birch held his gaze for a moment, then nodded and dropped back. 11 miles in, they hit the first real problem. It wasn't the road was passable, barely, but passable. It was a gate. A heavy steel gate stretched across the road, where no gate had been before, padlocked with a sign that read North Valley Resources Authorized Personnel Only Road Closed Hazardous Conditions. And the convoy stopped. Cole got out. He stood in front of the gate and read the sign twice. Behind him, he could hear engines idling and boots hitting pavement as people climbed down from trucks, and the low collective sound of 164 people registering the obstacle and waiting to see what came next. That gate wasn't there in October, said a man named Wick, who handled the northern supply route every year and knew this road as well as anyone. He was standing beside Cole, arms crossed, studying the padlock. He drove this road on the 14th, no gate. It's new, Cole agreed. A private company can't just put a gate across a county road, Birch said from behind them. He just did, Cole said. So what do we? Cole turned around. And Denny Chuck in the crowd. Denny, you've got that chain cutter in the back of your truck. And he blinked. Then a slow grin moved across his face. Hey, do. This is a county road, Cole said, loud enough for the people nearest him to hear. Private company posting a gate on a public road is not legal. And we're going to remove an illegally placed obstruction to a public thoroughfare. And 2 minutes later, the padlock was on the ground and the gate was open. And one, Cole stood back and watched the convoy begin to move through. It was a small thing, a padlock on a gate. But something shifted in the air when it came off, a kind of collective recognition that they had tested the first resistance and it had given way, and that changed the weight of everything that came after. Inigauco. Cole felt it. He could see it in the way people's shoulders changed, the way the next 100 yards of movement had a different quality than the 100 before. He was getting back in his truck when his CB crackled. The following vehicle, the one that had been pacing them for the last several miles, had stopped at the gate. It wasn't following them through. They're turning around, Rusty reported. Inigo pulled a 3-point in the road and they're heading back down. And Cole processed this. A tail that turned around at the gate meant one of two things. Either they'd been watching to see if the convoy would stop, and now that they hadn't, the watcher had gone back to report. And, or, more concerning the gate, was the last early warning system, and whatever was ahead didn't need an observer anymore because it was already set. Picked up the CB, Rusty. Get to the front. I want you on point with me. Copy. Emily had been navigating from memory, which was something Cole found both impressive and slightly unnerving. And she'd memorized the coordinates her father had given her, committed them not just as numbers, but as a route. She'd studied a topographical map of the area in the days after her father disappeared, and cross-referencing the numbers against the terrain, until she could describe what she'd find at each waypoint without looking at anything. After the second creek crossing, the road forks, she said. Take the left fork. The right one ends at the old public mine entrance. Any the left goes another 2 miles, and there's a structure my father described it as looking abandoned. He said it's on the edge of the old survey grid, in a section of land that North Valley filed as reclaimed. It shouldn't have anything on it, according to the county property records. It does. According to my father, yes. He said the satellite imagery shows a structure that's not in any building permit database. Not commercial, not residential, nothing. Birch, who had climbed in the back seat at the gate, leaned forward. Off-book facility. That's what he believed. He said the location is in a dead zone, no cell coverage, minimal flight path traffic, surrounded by land that North Valley technically owns or has contracted rights on. It's the most isolated, accessible location in this part of the mountains. Accessible by what? Birch asked. Mining road, Emily said. Old one, barely maintained, but passable if you know where it is. And father said they maintain just enough to get equipment in and out, but they keep it gated and unmarked, so it doesn't appear on any commercial map. And Cole was already thinking 3 moves ahead, an off-book structure on off-book land, accessible by an unmarked road in a communication dead zone. And the design of that wasn't accidental. That was a place built specifically to hold things or people that weren't supposed to exist. And your father found this on his own? He asked. He had a source, Emily said, and here she paused, a brief hesitation that told Cole this was the part of the story she'd been most careful about. Someone inside North Valley. He never told me the name. And he said the less I knew about the source, the safer we both were. But the source gave him a document, an internal facilities inventory that listed this location with a code designation rather than a proper address. And was the code designation? Birch asked. NV7 Secure Storage, Emily said. Sounds like they're storing equipment. But your father didn't think they were storing equipment. No, she said quietly, he didn't. And the second creek crossing came up sooner than expected, and Cole eased the truck through it slowly, and he feeling the water drag against the undercarriage, cold fast and deeper than it should have been given the weather. And which meant melt was happening somewhere above them, which was its own kind of information about the conditions higher on the mountain. He got through clean. Behind him, the convoy followed one vehicle at a time, Rusty calling each one through on the CB. And the fork was exactly where Emily said it would be. Inigo, Cole took the left. The road narrowed immediately, and here the trees crowded in much closer on both sides, close enough that the larger trucks had to move carefully, watching their mirrors. The surface was rougher too, and Cole could feel it in the wheel. An old gravel, not maintained, the frost heaves of years pushing up through it. Half-mile, Emily said. Cole turned off his headlights. In the truck behind him, Birch's went off too, and the next one. And the next, the signal traveling back through the convoy, without a word being spoken, and the way a murmuration moves, each part responding to the part just ahead of it. The convoy moved in darkness, except for the faint ambient light the snow threw back. Emily was gripping the notebook hard enough that Cole could hear the cover creak. He's here, she said, and her voice was barely anything at all. He has to be here. We're going to find out, Cole said. And if she stopped herself, started again. What if they already moved him? What if this place is empty and he's somewhere else, somewhere we can't? Emily, what? One thing at a time, she went quiet. But her hand didn't loosen on the notebook. The structure appeared out of the darkness, the way things appear. When you're moving slowly without lights, gradually, in pieces, your brain assembling it from parts before you see the whole. A roof line first, then walls. In the shape of something larger than expected, not a shed, and not a small outbuilding, but a real structure, substantial, and the kind of thing that required significant material and significant effort to put in this location. In dark, no lights visible, Cole stopped the truck. For a long moment, he just sat there, engine idling, and looking at it. And the motion-activated lights would have come on, Birch said quietly from the back seat. If they have motion-activated lights, Cole said. Yeah, or they cut the power, Rusty's voice said through the CB from outside. Someone who knew we were coming might have gone dark on purpose. Cole picked up the CB. Hold the convoy here. Nobody moves until I say. Wick with me. Everyone else stays with the vehicles. He got out. The cold hit him the way it always did, after the insulated cab total and immediate, like stepping through a doorway into a different kind of world. He could hear the wind working through the pines above. He could hear nothing else. He walked toward the structure. And he came up on his left, Wick on his right. They didn't speak. And their boots made almost no sound in the snow. Cole reached the main door, heavy, metal, the kind of door that communicated something specific about what it was protecting, and put his hand flat against it. And cold, not cold the way outdoor surfaces are cold on a night like this. And colder, the specific cold of a refrigerated interior. He looked at Denny. Denny looked back at him. Someone's been running power to this, Denny said softly. And recently, Cole tried the handle. It moved. He looked back at the convoy, at the line of dark arc vehicles and the shapes of people he could barely make out standing beside them. He looked at the truck where Emily was waiting. He could see her shape in the passenger window, the pale blur of her face, the dark rectangle of the notebook she was still holding. He pushed the door open. The smell that came out first was stale air recirculated, temperature controlled, the smell of a sealed space that had been maintained carefully for a long time. And under that, something else, something chemical, faintly antiseptic. And under that, barely there, the specific human smell of someone who had been in one place for a very long time. And Cole stepped inside. Flashlight swept the interior equipment racks along one wall, and filing cabinets, a folding table covered in papers, and then, in the far corner, past a partition wall that divided the space into two sections, and the flashlight beam caught something that stopped him completely. A man, sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, wrists zip-tied to a pipe that ran along the baseboard, eyes closed but moving. And breathing. In the specific shallow, any rapid breathing of someone who has been through something long and terrible and has descended into the kind of sleep that is less sleep than unconsciousness and is still, undeniably, still alive. And Cole crossed to him in 3 steps. He crouched down. And the man's face was gaunt 12 days. Without proper food would do that. And there was a cut above his left eyebrow that it had healed badly, and his hands, where they disappeared into the zip ties, were swollen. His color was better than it had any right to be. And when Cole put a hand on his shoulder, the man's eyes opened. And they were the same dark blue as his daughter's, confused at first. In focusing. Then something came into Thomas Carter's face that was nothing as simple as relief. It was the specific expression of a man who made a decision that cost him everything and is now discovering, in the first time, that the cost might not be permanent. His voice was almost nothing. 12 days of disuse. And who are you? Cole Mercer, Cole said. Thomas Carter closed his eyes for a moment. And he opened them again. They were wet. She found you, he said. She walked 10 miles in a blizzard to find me, Cole said. She's outside right now. A sound came out of Thomas Carter that was somewhere between a laugh and something that had no name. His head dropped forward. I told her, he said. I told her you'd come. And don't talk yet, Cole said. Let me get these ties off you. Pulled out his knife. He was already cutting when he heard Emily's voice behind him. She hadn't stayed in the truck. And of course she hadn't. And she said one word, and just one word, in her father's name, Nim. And just the one syllable of it, and the sound of that syllable in that room. In that darkness, surrounded by evidence of what had been done and what it had cost, that sound was something none of the men who heard it ever forgot. And Cole kept cutting. The zip ties came off and Thomas Carter's arms fell forward, and he made a sound that wasn't quite a groan and wasn't quite a cry. It was the sound a body makes. Circulation returns to places it's been cut off from for too long. And the specific pain of blood, remembering where it belongs. Emily was already on her knees beside him before Cole could say anything. She had both hands on her father's face and tilting it toward her and reading it the way you read something you thought you might never see again, carefully and desperately, that's in cataloging every detail against the version you've been carrying in your head. And Dad, she kept saying, just that, just the word over and over, like she was trying to make it real by repeating it. And Dad, I'm here. Thomas Carter's hands found her arms. His grip was weak. 12 days had taken most of his strength, but it was there. Intentional. I knew, he said. His voice was barely functional, ground down to almost nothing. I knew you'd come. Stop talking, Emily said. Don't talk. The notebooks, I have it. Dad, I have it. Stop talking. And Cole stepped back and let them have the moment. He turned to Denny and Wick, who were standing near the partition wall with the particular stillness of men trying to take up as little space as possible. Margaret in here, Cole said quietly, and I need 3 people going through everything in this room. Document before you touch. Photos first, then handle. And Denny was already moving toward the door. Wick pulled out a camera, the disposable kind, the only kind that would work reliably in this cold, and started working the room systematically. Moving from the equipment racks to the filing cabinets to the table covered in papers without touching any of it, just recording, the flash going off in steady intervals like a slow mechanical heartbeat. And Cole moved to the filing cabinets. He didn't open them yet. He looked at the labels, on the drawers typed labels, and not handwritten, which told him this facility had been organized professionally, not improvised. And the labels were coded. Letter number combinations that didn't mean anything on their own, but would mean a great deal to someone who had the key to the coding system. He took his own camera from his jacket pocket and photographed each label. Then he went to the table. The papers spread across it were a mix. Some clearly official documents with letterheads he recognized, and some handwritten notes in a cramped, precise script that matched what was in Thomas Carter's notebook, and some that looked like internal memos, and the kind of thing that only existed in one copy and was never supposed to leave the building where it originated. He didn't read them thoroughly. There wasn't time. And he photographed every page. And behind him, he heard Thomas Carter's voice gaining slightly. More volume, not strong. And he began, but more than it had been 30 seconds ago. A human body's ability to rally, when it had something to rally for, was something Cole had seen enough times to trust, but still found remarkable. In the third cabinet, Thomas was saying to Emily, bottom drawer, and there's a false back. I put the original survey documents there when they first locked me in. He didn't know if they'd search thoroughly or not. Emily looked up at Cole. Cole was already moving to the third cabinet. He opened the bottom drawer. It was full of hanging files, apparently empty folders, the mundane debris of an office operation. He reached to the back and pressed. The back panel gave a simple push-release mechanism, not sophisticated, but effective in a space where nobody was supposed to be looking. And behind it was a manila envelope, thick, sealed with what looked like 3 separate layers of tape. And Cole brought it back to Thomas. Inibinos. Thomas took it with hands that were still shaking from the cold and the returning circulation, and 12 days of accumulated fear, and he held it for a moment, without opening it, just held it, and then just feeling the weight of it. Anytime you hold something you protected at significant personal cost to verify it's still real. Original field survey documents, he said, the actual soil samples, properly logged with their actual locations. Any chain of custody documentation, and a recording. He looked up at Cole. In Nair, I had a recorder in my jacket when they brought me here. They took my phone, my keys, my wallet. They didn't take the recorder because it looked like a pen. And he got 14 minutes of conversation between two of the North Valley executives before the battery died. He didn't know I was recording. They were very candid. And about what they'd done, Cole said. About all of it, Thomas said. And the staged contamination, the falsified reports, the payments to county officials. And he paused. His jaw tightened. And what they planned to do with me, once they decided the publicity of making me disappear permanently was less of a risk than letting me out. And the room went very quiet. Emily's hand found her father's arm and held on. He discussed it, Thomas said, directly, matter-of-factly. And the way you discuss a business decision, there were two of them, and they talked about it like I wasn't sitting 10 feet away. He looked at Cole. I think by that point, they assumed I couldn't hear properly anymore. I wasn't in great shape, but I heard every word. And Cole held the envelope and thought about 14 minutes of recorded conversation between corporate executives, casually discussing whether to kill a man and how to do it without generating attention. And he thought about what that recording would do when it reached people with the authority to act on it. You need to move, he said. All of this, the documents, the recording, everything in those cabinets, it leaves with us tonight. Every piece of it. They'll say it was obtained illegally, Thomas said. They'll try to suppress it. They can try, Cole said. But suppression is a lot harder when the story's already out. He looked at Thomas directly. How long before your source at North Valley realizes you've been found? Do they have anyone watching this location? Thomas blinked. Something shifted in his face, a calculation happening, pieces moving. In source, he stopped. You said Emily mentioned a source inside North Valley, Cole said. Someone who gave you the internal facilities inventory. Thomas's voice changed slightly, a new kind of caution entering it. Yes, they gave me the inventory. But Cole, I've been sitting here for 12 days thinking about something. Thinking about how they found me so quickly after I received that document. They drove straight from my house to this mountain, and they were ahead of me. And they were already here. Cole looked at him. You think the source sets you up, Cole said. I think... Thomas stopped. I think it's possible the source is real and was also being watched. Inigo, or I think it's possible the source gave me exactly enough to bring me to this specific location. He looked at the envelope in Cole's hands. Either way, someone knew where I was going. And if that someone is still active, they may already know we're here. And Cole turned to Wick. Go outside. Tell Birch I need a full perimeter check immediately. Eyes on every approach, Wick went. Any co. Cole looked back at Thomas Carter and Emily and made a decision about 3 seconds, the kind of decision that takes 3 seconds. Because you've already been thinking about it for the last 20 minutes without naming it as thinking. And we're not going back the way we came, he said. It took 12 minutes to get Thomas Carter stable enough to move, and another 8 to load the filing cabinet contents into the waterproof storage bags that 3 of the bikers had produced from somewhere. Cole didn't ask where. And who'd been doing supply runs in Montana winters for years tended to have exactly the right thing in a bag somewhere. By minute 20, the structure had been thoroughly documented. The false-back documents were secured. And Thomas Carter was in Cole's truck, wrapped in every spare piece of thermal gear they had. Margaret had checked him over with the quick efficiency of someone working in poor conditions with limited resources, and her report to Cole was characteristically blunt, dehydrated. Into borderline hypothermic, not as bad as his daughter when she came in, but close. Malnourished. That cut above his eye is infected, not badly, but it needs treatment. He's functional. He's not going to fall apart on you in the next few hours if you don't let him get cold again. He won't get cold, Cole said. I know, Margaret said, and went to make sure of it. And she and Cole was at his truck, checking the route on the paper map he kept in. The glove box he'd trusting digital maps for these mountains years ago when Birch appeared at his window. The look on Birch's face was the look Cole associated with news that had been thought through enough to be certain and was still bad. "And there are vehicles on the road," Birch said. "Not the same tale from before. These are new. Multiple Rusty counts at least 4 sets of headlights, and they're not moving slow. And they're coming up fast." Cole checked his watch. They'd been at the facility for just under 30 minutes. "How far?" "Rusty estimates 4 minutes, maybe 5. 4 minutes. The convoy needed at least 7 to fully turn around and move in the opposite direction on this road, even with everyone moving efficiently." "And there's a secondary track," Emily said from the passenger seat. And she'd been listening. "My father mentioned it. The mining road splits about a quarter-mile ahead. The left branch goes back to the main ridge road, but the right branch goes down the other side of the mountain. It's longer. It comes out near the town of Miller's Creek." And Cole looked at her. "How do you know that?" "Because I studied every road on this map for 3 days after my father disappeared, she said, and her voice was entirely steady. "Didn't know which one I'd need. I memorized all of them." And Cole made the decision in 1 second. "Tell the convoy." "Right branch. Hard right at the first split ahead." "Move now." Birch was already gone. The convoy began moving, not with the careful spacing from before, but with the compressed urgency of people who understood that the ground had changed and the rules of the last hour no longer applied. Engines that had been idling became engines under load. And the line of vehicles pushed forward into the dark. And Cole pulled out behind them. "Your father," he said to Emily. "He's in the back with Margaret?" "Yes. How is he?" "Wake." She paused, relieved, both at the same time. "That tracks. He keeps saying he's sorry," Emily said, and something in her voice went briefly raw before she controlled it. "Seep, for putting me in this, for disappearing. I keep telling him to stop and he keeps saying it anyway." "Protected what he found," Cole said. 12 days. "And ever it cost him." "I know," Emily said. "I know he did." And she stopped. Cole let her stop. He didn't fill the silence. After a moment, she said, "I just want to be mad at him for a little while. I'll get over it. But for right now, I just want to be mad that he scared me that badly." That's exactly right," Cole said. "That's exactly what you should feel." And she was quiet for a moment. "Then he's going to be okay, isn't he?" "He's going to be fine. You don't know that." "No," Cole said. But I know what not fine looks like, and he's not it. Tough. Whatever they did to him didn't break what matters." Emily said nothing. Gone. But some of the tension in her posture shifted, and very slightly, in either way a cable shifts when the weight on it is redistributed, still taut, indifferently, but different. And the split in the road came up, and the convoy took it right, and the vehicles ahead of Cole, already negotiating the turn, and the larger trucks going wide, and then correcting. Everyone moving with more speed than Cole would have preferred on this surface, but with less than the situation was pushing for, which meant people were keeping their heads. Birch's voice came through the CB. "The vehicles on the main road, they've reached the facility. And I can see their lights from the ridge." Cole keyed his handset. "AP, how many? 4 vehicles. 8, maybe 10 people. And they're going into the structure." "Let them," Cole said. "Everything worth having already left." A pause. Then Rusty's voice, "Cole. 10 of those vehicles just turned around. They're coming toward the fork." "How fast?" "Fast." Cole pressed his foot down. "Tell everyone ahead of me to give me whatever they've got. I need the bottom of this mountain." And the next 11 minutes were the kind of 11 minutes that compress in memory into a series of still images, not because they were calm, but because the mind under genuine pressure tends to take photographs rather than film, Inishi preserving the moments that matter and letting the space between them go dark. Cole drove, and behind him, at least one vehicle in pursuit. He could see the headlights in his mirror now, gaining, but not as fast as they'd been, and because this road was not a road anyone could drive fast on without risking everything. And whoever was behind him was learning that the same way Cole had learned it when he was 22 years old, and trying to prove something on mountain roads before he understood that the mountain was not something you conquered by going faster. In the back seat, he could hear Margaret talking to Thomas Carter in the low, even voice she used when she was keeping someone calm and present. Thomas was responding actual words, not just sounds, which was the most important information available. Emily sat with both hands braced on the dash and said nothing, which Cole had learned in the past hour was what she did when she was operating at maximum capacity, not silence from absence, but silence from the concentration of everything she had. And the headlights behind them dropped back, not much. Enough. They hit something, Rusty reported from somewhere in the convoy. In middle vehicle on the pursuit, I think they blew a tire, or they went into the bank. And they stopped. The other one kept coming, but it's slower now. And Cole said nothing, he just drove. Then Birch, Cole. And there's someone on the CB, not one of us. They're trying to reach us on Channel 9. And put them through. Static. Then a voice Cole recognized immediately, flat, authoritative, professionally neutral in the way that only comes from years of practicing professional neutrality. And Sheriff Dale Pruitt Mercer. Not a question, not a greeting. Iniskist. Just a name, the way you say a name when you want the other person to understand that the social formalities are over. I need you to stop those vehicles. Good evening, Sheriff, Cole said. And this is an active investigation. You are interfering with. An active investigation into what? Cole said. Thomas Carter's disappearance, because I've got Thomas Carter right here in my truck. He seems to be alive. That's a good outcome for an investigation. You must be relieved. A pause, long enough to mean something. Where is he? Pruitt's voice had shifted, the professional neutrality cracking at the edge, something harder and less careful showing through underneath it. And where are you taking him? To medical care, Cole said. He's been held in a facility on North Valley land for 12 days. He needs a hospital. Mercer. Everything that was in that facility, in Jisui, Cole said, is now documented and photographed and distributed to enough separate locations that the question of suppression is, respectfully, and no longer on the table. He kept his voice as even as Pruitt's. Governor, I want you to hear what I'm saying clearly. This is not a negotiation. This is me telling you that the outcome you are managing for is no longer achievable. Another pause. Longer. You don't know what you've gotten into, Pruitt said. And now there was something in his voice that was not anger and was not threat. It was closer to fear, the specific fear of a man who has been operating under the assumption that certain events were controllable and is now receiving information that they are not. You know exactly what I've gotten into, Cole said. The question is what you're going to do about the situation you're in. He clicked off the channel. Emily was looking at him. What does he do now? She asked. He makes a calculation, Cole said. And same calculation people like him always make when the ground shifts. He figures out which version of events is most survivable for him, personally, and he moves toward that. And which version is most survivable? The one where he was investigating North Valley the whole time and didn't know about your father's location until tonight. Emily stared at him. He'll try to take credit. He'll try to manage the story, Cole said. And he'll fail because the story's already out of his hands. He glanced in the mirror. The pursuing headlights had fallen back further, almost gone now. And the recording your father made. The executives discussing what to do with him. And that recording means Pruitt can't rewrite himself into this. He's in that conversation or he's not, and we'll know soon enough which one it is. Thomas Carter's voice came from the back seat, stronger now, more focused. He's in it, Thomas said, not by name. But one of the executives mentions a local contact who can manage visibility. That's Pruitt's phrase. He used it in a county commissioner meeting 3 years ago. They have the minutes. Cole processed this. You have the commissioner meeting minutes. And have a lot of things, Thomas said. I've been building this file for 14 months. And what's in that envelope is the capstone, not the whole structure. In kind. Cole looked at Birch in his mirror. Birch raised his eyebrows slightly, the expression of a man recalibrating the scale of what they were dealing with. And Thomas, Cole said, when we get you out of these mountains, you're going to need to give me the names of every person you trust outside of this county. And journalists, federal contacts, anyone who can move fast and can't be leaned on by anyone with a stake in this. I have a list, Thomas said. I've had a list for months. They just couldn't reach anyone from inside a locked room. A pause. I have a contact at the EPA's Office of Inspector General. And I have a journalist at the Tribune who's been covering North Valley's permitting issues for 2 years. And I have a former North Valley employee who left the company 14 months ago and has been willing to talk on the record for 9 of those months, but needed something corroborating before she'd go public. She'll have corroboration, Cole said. Yes, Thomas said. And she will. And the bottom of the mountain road came up with a sudden flattening that meant they'd broken out of the ridge terrain and were on the lower slope. And Miller's Creek was 7 miles ahead on roads that were rough but passable and more importantly, main roads, county roads. Roads with traffic even at this hour. Roads where what had just happened in the mountains above would have witnesses the moment they appeared on them. Cole heard Rusty on the CB. Pursuit has stopped. Both vehicles stopped. And they're not following on to the lower road because the lower road had witnesses. And because whatever could happen in the dark of a mountain in a blizzard was different from what could happen in view of a county road at 2 a.m. Because they had made a calculation, and the calculation had come out the same way Cole's had. The mountain had been the last place, but this was containable, and the mountain was behind them now. And exhaled just once, quietly. Thomas Carter said from the back seat, "Are we clear?" "It's clear," Cole said. He heard Thomas breathe a long, unsteady exhale that was probably the first breath the man had fully released in 12 days. Emily reached back between the seats without looking and found her father's hand. And she didn't say anything. She just held on. And Cole drove them down toward the lights of Miller's Creek, and even with the evidence of everything that had been done and everything that had been buried riding in the truck behind him, and the storm still moving overhead and the mountain behind them, full of people who had just run out of time. Miller's Creek had a population of 600 and a diner that stayed open all night because the owner, a woman named Patrice, decided 20 years ago that a town this far from everything else deserved at least one place where the lights were always on. And that was where Cole stopped the convoy, not because it was strategic, because Thomas Carter needed hot food and warm coffee and a table that wasn't moving, and because Patrice's diner had a landline telephone that Cole had used before when the mountain roads had eaten his signal, and because 164 people and their vehicles pulling into a small town at 2:30 in the morning was itself a kind of announcement, the kind that meant whatever happened next would have witnesses. Treese came out from behind the counter when the first truck pulled in, and she stood in the doorway, watching. The convoy fill her parking lot and overflow onto the road, and her expression moved through surprise, and then recognition, and then something that settled into a kind of matter-of-fact readiness, the way people who have run a place alone for 20 years in a rural Montana winter tend to settle when something large and unexpected arrives at their door. "Any?" she asked Cole when he walked in. "Hungry ones," he said. "And that's all of them," she said, and went back to the kitchen. Cole brought Thomas to a booth in the back, away from the windows. And Margaret sat across from him and kept her hand on his wrist, at intervals, not romantically, clinically, checking his pulse with the regularity of someone who was going to keep checking until she was satisfied and wasn't there yet. Emily sat beside her father, with her shoulder pressed against his arm, and she hadn't moved that shoulder since she climbed out of the truck, and she showed no signs of moving it. And Thomas ate. He ate the way a man eats who has been rationing for 12 days and knows intellectually that he should go slowly and is having a very hard time making his body comply with that knowledge. A bowl of soup first, because Margaret insisted, and then eggs and toast and coffee, then and somewhere in the middle of the second cup of coffee, the color started coming back into his face in a way that made Emily stop holding her breath. And though she didn't notice, she'd been holding it until she stopped. And Cole sat across from them and used Patrice's landline. The first call was to a man named Arthur Gaines, who was an investigative reporter at the Great Falls Tribune, and who answered on the fourth ring with the irritable half-conscious of someone who had been asleep for 2 hours and was not pleased about being woken, but was too. And professionally conditioned to let that stop them from listening. And Cole gave him the short version, 60 seconds. In the shape of it, in the location of the facility, in Thomas Carter's name, in the North Valley Resources, and for the recording. Arthur Gaines stopped sounding irritable after about 15 seconds. "Where are you now?" he asked. Cole told him. "Don't go anywhere," Arthur said. "You can be there in under 3 hours. Drive carefully," Cole said. "And roads are bad. I've driven in worse for worse stories," Arthur said. "And this one actually matters. I'll be there." Cole hung up and made the second call the EPA's Office of Inspector General, which had an after-hours emergency line that Cole had obtained from Thomas. He said the number from memory with the steady precision of a man who had been mentally rehearsing the scenario for 12 days. And the person who answered was professional and careful and took detailed information without expressing emotion, which was either reassuring or unsettling depending on your disposition. And they confirmed that a field agent would be dispatched and that the chain of custody for the physical documents was critical. Cole should not allow those documents to be handled without proper logging from this point forward. And again, Cole looked at the waterproof bag sitting on the seat beside him and thought about Wick and Denny's careful photographic documentation back at the facility and said, yes, the chain of custody was understood. Third call. Thomas's contact at North Valley, the former employee, the one who'd been willing to go on record for 9 months and just needed corroboration. Her name was Sandra Oakes. She answered on the second ring. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and she answered on the second ring, which meant she was either awake or sleeping with one ear open for a call she'd been expecting for a long time. "Thomas," she said immediately. "This is Cole Mercer," Cole said. "With Thomas. He's safe." A sound came through the phone that Cole couldn't entirely categorize: relief and grief, and something that had been held under enormous pressure for a very long time releasing all at once. "Hey, thank God," she said. "Oh, thank God. I didn't know. I heard he'd disappeared, and I didn't know if they—" "He's here," Cole said. "He's okay, and the evidence is secured." including the recording. All of it. She went quiet for a moment. Any then, the recording of which conversation? Cole told her. Another silence. And then, that recording, and combined with what I have, Cole, they won't be able to walk away from this. Not any of them. What do you have? Cole asked. 14 months of documentation, she said. Internal communications, budget allocations for the falsified survey work, and signed authorizations. I kept copies of everything when I left because I knew they wouldn't stop at what they'd already done. They just didn't have enough on my own to go public without being destroyed. And you have enough now, Cole said. Yes, Sandra Oaks said quietly. And now I do. Cole told her to contact Arthur Gaines at the Tribune first thing in the morning, gave her the number, and hung up. He went back inside. Birch was waiting for him near the door, holding 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to Cole without comment, which was Birch's version of asking how things were going. And 3 calls, Cole said. Reporters coming. Federal contact is dispatching. An inside source is ready to go public. Birch nodded slowly. And Pruitt, still up there, Cole said, or back in town. Either way, his next move is going to tell us a lot about how far this actually goes. And I've been thinking about that, Birch said. The sheriff calls us off the mountain. And the gate on the road, the tailing vehicle, the pursuit down the secondary track. He paused. And Pruitt didn't organize all of that alone. He's a county sheriff. He doesn't have the resources or the authority to run a 12-day disappearance and a surveillance operation on a mountain road. No, Cole said, he doesn't, which means someone with more resources organized it, and Pruitt was the local piece. Yes, which means when this comes out, Birch said, whoever that person is will try to make Pruitt into the whole story. And Pruitt takes the fall, they get distance. Cole looked at him. And which is why Thomas's recording is the most important thing. The people above Pruitt are on that recording. Even indirectly, they can't use him as the firewall. And if they're not on it, then we make sure the story is big enough that people start pulling threads, Cole said. Big enough that you can't contain it by offering one person. And Birch drank his coffee. He was quiet for a moment. And he said, Cole, there's something you should know. Indeed, Cole waited. When I was organizing the convoy earlier, running the perimeter check, I talked to a man at the back of the convoy. Ames Garrett. He's been with us 8 months. Came in from the Billings chapter. Garrett, Cole said. He told me he got a call on his cell phone right before we left the clubhouse. He said it was a wrong number. Hang up. Birch was looking at him steadily. His cell number isn't published anywhere, and we were in a dead zone on that mountain. Which means his phone was working in a place where nobody else's was. And the coffee cup in Cole's hand went very still. Where is he now? Cole said. And I've had Rusty watching him since we got here, Birch said. He's at the counter. He hasn't made any calls. He hasn't left the building. Has he talked to anyone outside the chapter? Not that Rusty's seen. And Cole thought about this, about the tail that had known to follow them at a distance, about the pursuit vehicles that had arrived at the facility in under 30 minutes, and about the timing of the sheriff's call to the clubhouse 10 minutes before Emily came through the door. Nikki Garrett to me, Cole said, quietly. And Garrett was 26 years old, with the kind of deliberately maintained physical presence that some younger members cultivated broad and deliberate in movement, a face arranged to communicate more confidence than it actually held. Sat across from Cole in the far booth, and his eyes moved to Birch standing behind him, and then back to Cole. And you got a call tonight, Cole said, before we left. And tell me about it. Garrett's jaw shifted, a small movement. And wrong number. I told Birch, I know what you told Birch, Cole said. And tell me again. Different version if you have one. And Garrett looked at the table. Then he looked up, and something in his face changed. The maintenance dropped. And the constructed confidence fell away. And what was underneath it was younger and more frightened and more human. He said if I reported the convoy's movements, they'd make something go away, he said. The booth was completely quiet. Something, Cole said. Situation from before I came to the chapter, Garrett said. Before Montana, they said they had documentation. Said they'd release it if I didn't cooperate. What did you give them? And I told them when we left the clubhouse, Garrett said. In route we were taking, general size of the convoy. He looked directly at Cole and whatever else he was. He seemed to understand that now was not the moment for further evasion. I didn't tell him about the girl. I didn't know about the girl yet when I made the call. And when I understood what was actually happening, he stopped. He didn't make another call. I want you to know that. And he had opportunities, and I didn't make another call. And why not? Cole said. Garrett looked at him for a long moment. Because I saw her walk to her father in that building, he said. And I thought about what I was part of, and I decided. He stopped again. They decided whatever they have on me is my problem to deal with. And not something I get to use to hurt other people. Cole studied him. He was a reasonable judge of sincerity after 28 years in rooms with people who had significant reasons to perform it. And what he saw in Garrett's face was not performance. It was the specific expression of someone who had made a decision they couldn't take back and was presenting themselves for whatever consequence came next. The people who called you, Cole said. Do you have the number? It was blocked. Did you recognize the voice? No. Male, professional, could have been anyone. Cole looked at Birch. Birch gave a minimal nod. He'd heard enough. Here's what happens now, Cole said to Garrett. And eat whatever they have on you. You're going to tell me about it tonight. And in all of it. Because if they decide to release it as retaliation when this story comes out, I want to know it's coming. And I want to be able to help if I can. He held Garrett's gaze. And because you made the right call in that building, you're going to have the chance to make it right the rest of the way. But that starts with no more half information. Understand? And he swallowed. Yes. Good, Cole said. Start from the beginning. He listened to Garrett for 20 minutes. What Garrett told him was neither as bad as it could have been as Cole would have preferred. But it was honest. He could hear the texture of honesty in it. And the way a true story catches on its own details in a way that a constructed one doesn't. And he filed it away, made 2 mental notes, and told Garrett to stay close to Wick for the rest of the night. And he went back to Thomas Carter's booth. And Thomas was looking better. Not while nothing that food and coffee and warmth could do in 2 hours would make a man look well after 12 days of captivity, but present. And focused, the investigator's mind reasserting itself over the body's damage. He had the notebook open on the table and was going through it page by page with the careful attention of someone reviewing a document they wrote in a different state of mind and need to verify against current reality. And there's something I haven't told you, Thomas said when Cole sat down. Emily looked up sharply. There are 20 families who were displaced, Thomas said. We've talked about that. What I haven't said is that I have contacts with 14 of those families. In current contacts, people I've spoken to in the past 8 months. He looked at Cole. And some of them never fully left. They relocated to nearby towns, stayed in the area because they couldn't bear to go far from land that had been in their families for generations. And they're within 2 or 3 hours of here. You want to reach them tonight, Cole said. I want them to know before the news cycle starts, Thomas said. I want them to hear from a person, not from a headline. I want them to know that what was done to them has been documented and that the people who did it are going to face consequences. He paused. And see, some of these people gave up and took the settlement money because they were scared. And they didn't have any other option. And then they spent years believing that the land really was contaminated and that they really had been doing the right thing by leaving. And that the company had actually been doing them a favor. His voice tightened. And they believed a lie for 4 years because that was easier than believing they'd been robbed. I want them to know the truth before they hear it secondhand. Cole thought about 14 families within 2 or 3 hours. He thought about the convoy 164 people who had driven up a mountain in a blizzard and were now sitting in a diner in Miller's Creek eating eggs and drinking coffee and waiting to see what came next. "Give me the list," Cole said. Thomas looked at him. "What are you going to do with it?" "I'm going to make sure that when Arthur Gaines gets here in 2 hours, he doesn't just have documents and recordings. He has people, names, faces, voices." Cole leaned forward slightly. "Story about corporate corruption with documents is a legal story. A story about 23 families with names and faces and 4 years of living with a lie, that's something people don't look away from." Emily put her hand on the table between them, not reaching for anyone's hand, and just putting it there, flat, steadying herself. "He's right, Dad," she said. "And you know he's right." Thomas looked at his daughter for a long moment, the look of a father reading a person who used to be his child and is now something more than that, has become something in the space of this night that he's still catching up to. "All right," he said. He picked up the notebook and turned to a page near the back. 14 families. I'll write out what I know about where each of them is now." He picked up the pen Patrice had left on the table. "Give me 15 minutes," he started writing. Cole stood up, and he was turning toward the door when it opened. Not Gaines, it was too early for Gaines. Not any of his people, they were already inside. It was Dale Pruitt. The sheriff of Carver County came into Patrice's diner at 3:12 in the morning in full uniform, and behind him were 2 deputies. And the expression on his face was the expression of a man who had been calculating all the way down from that mountain and had arrived at a number he didn't like, but had decided to commit to anyway. And the diner went quiet. Not all at once the quiet spread from the door inward. It ended table by table and person by person until 164 people and a sheriff were existing in the same space in total silence. And Pruitt's eyes found Cole. Cole didn't move toward him. Stood where he was and let Pruitt cover the distance. "You need the documents," Pruitt said. He said it straight, no preamble, no attempt at legal language or official framing. Just the 4 words and their naked meaning underneath. "No," Cole said. "Mercer." "No," Cole said again. "They're documented, photographed, and the originals are in federal chain of custody as of 45 minutes ago. And you know what chain of custody means for your ability to control what happens next." Pruitt's deputies shifted behind him, not moving toward anything. And just shifting the way men shift when they're trying to decide whether a situation requires movement and haven't decided yet. And Birch materialized at Cole's left shoulder, then Denny at his right. It didn't happen with drama or announcement. It was simply that the space around Cole filled quietly and immediately with people. And Pruitt looked at the room. He looked at the faces, all of them turned toward him now. Every person in that diner oriented in his direction, with the focused collective attention of people who had driven through a blizzard together and come out the other side of something and were not inclined. And to take a step backward at this particular moment. He looked back at Cole, and Cole saw it happen, saw the specific moment when a man's calculation completes, and the number that comes out is not the one he wanted, and he has to decide whether to act on it anyway or let it go. And Pruitt let it go, not with grace, not with acknowledgement. He just stopped. His jaw worked once. His eyes went to the booth where Thomas Carter was sitting, and Thomas looked back at him with the patient steadiness of a man who has been afraid of this specific person for a very long time and has just now run out of fear. And Pruitt turned around and walked out the door. His deputies followed him. And the diner was silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then someone near the front, Cole couldn't see who started to clap. It was a slow clap, rhythmic, not triumphant, but deliberate. Instinct, someone else picked it up, and then more, and spreading through the room until it filled the diner the way warmth fills a room, not all at once, but comprehensively, and leaving nowhere cold. And Cole didn't participate. He stood where he was and looked at Thomas Carter, Engine, who was looking back at him, and Thomas raised his coffee cup, slightly a small gesture, private. Private, now for the room, and Cole nodded once. Emily was crying. She wasn't trying to hide it, and she wasn't making a production of it. She was just sitting beside her father, with tears running down her face, and both her hands wrapped around his arm. And Thomas had stopped writing the list of names, and was looking at the side of her face with an expression that had no adequate description in English, or probably any language, the expression of a father who has been very close to losing everything and is sitting in a diner in Miller's Creek at 3 a.m. watching his daughter cry with relief. Cole looked away. Some things weren't meant to be witnessed. Picked up Patrice's phone again. He had 9 more calls to make before Arthur Gaines arrived. And the night was not finished yet, and the mountain was still up there in the dark and full of people trying to outrun what they'd done. They weren't going to make it, but that was tomorrow's story. Night Cole Mercer stood in a diner with a landline phone in his hand and a list of 14 families who needed to hear a human voice before the world changed around them, and he started to dial. And the first call went to a woman named Ruth Hendricks. And Thomas had written her name at the top of the list, underlined it, and beside it written a single word, first. And he didn't ask why. Cole didn't ask why. When Thomas handed him the list, he trusted the man's instinct about the order. Thomas had spent 14 months with these families, had earned the right to know which phone call would set the tone for all the others. Answered on the 3rd ring. Her voice was the voice of a woman who had been sleeping lightly for 4 years, the voice of someone whose sleep had never fully recovered from the night they were told their land was poisoned. Hello? Cautious, middle of the night. Cautious was reasonable. Mrs. Hendricks, Cole said. My name is Cole Mercer. I'm calling from Miller's Creek. I'm sitting here with Thomas Carter. Silence. Then, Thomas. Not a question, the sound of a name that meant something large and complicated. Is he all right? He's going to be fine, Cole said. He wants me to tell you something, and then he wants to talk to you himself. Can you hear me? Yes. Her voice had changed. Alert now. In present, the contamination on your family's land was never real, Cole said. He said it straight. No preparation, no gentle approach. And Thomas had been specific about this. When he handed Cole the list, don't soften it. They've been living with the soft version for 4 years. They deserve the direct version. And environmental reports were falsified. The soil samples were taken from a different location and filed under your property's coordinates. North Valley Resources staged the contamination findings to force the displacement. And your land was never dangerous. Your family was removed from property they should never have had to leave. And the silence that followed was different from the first silence. And this one had weight to it. The weight of 4 years of a particular kind of grief, the complicated grief of people who were angry but couldn't be purely angry because they'd believed the anger was at least partially misdirected and had carried guilt alongside the loss. Because what if they'd made the wrong decision taking the settlement money? What if there had been another way? What if, what if, what if? And Cole had heard silences like this before. He let it hold. And then Ruth Hendricks made a sound that was nothing like crying and nothing like LaFana's, and was somehow both the sound of a weight lifting off something that had been bent under it for a very long time. He knew, she said, and her voice was shaking, and kept telling. Robert, I kept saying something was wrong. That land had been in my husband's family for 80 years, and there was never anything wrong with it, and they kept showing us the reports, and I kept. She stopped and started again. I knew. You were right, Cole said. And Thomas is going to tell you what comes next, but I wanted you to hear it from a person first, before you see it anywhere else. He held the phone out across the booth. And Thomas took it. Ruth's name. He said Ruth's name and was already moving the moment to give the moment its privacy, and also because there were 13 more names on the list and the night was moving fast. He worked through the list with Birch beside him, trading off calls when his voice needed a minute, each conversation its own particular shape. And people answered on the first ring, like they'd been sitting up waiting for something they couldn't name. And some took 4 or 5 rings and answered groggy, then shifted gear so fast. It was like watching someone grab the wheel of a car that was drifting. Clemens didn't say anything for almost a full minute. After Cole told him the contamination had been manufactured, just breathed, long and slow and audible, the breathing of someone who was doing the work of restructuring something fundamental. And woman said, I have to wake my mother, and put the phone down without warning. And Cole stood there. Holding the receiver in Patrice's diner at 4 in the morning, listening to the sounds of a house at night until an elderly voice came on the line. And all 14 calls took just under 2 hours. And Cole put the phone down after the last one. His hand was stiff, and his voice was rougher than it had been. And Patrice appeared from nowhere with coffee and a plate of toast that he hadn't asked for and ate without tasting. Unique Arthur Gaines arrived at 5:47. He was a compact man in his early 50s with a reporter's particular brand of focused restlessness, the quality of someone whose attention, once engaged, and burned at a steady high intensity that would have been exhausting in a social context, but was exactly what the situation required. He came in the door. Encino clocked the room, identified Cole and Thomas without being told who was who, and sat down across from them both with a recorder already in his hand. Before we start, he said, looking at Thomas, are you all right? I'll be all right when this story is published, Thomas said. Arthur looked at him for a moment. Then he nodded, a short, professional nod that said understood, let's make that happen, and clicked on the recorder. And followed was the most thorough 3 hours Cole had ever witnessed. And Arthur Gaines operated the way the best investigators operate, not extracting information so much as creating the conditions in which information wanted to come out. He asked questions that suggested he already knew more than he did, which made Thomas fill in gaps that he might otherwise have glossed over. He asked for specifics when Thomas generalized, dates when Thomas approximated, and names always names when Thomas tried to describe a category of person. And Thomas produced the recording of 14 minutes of executive conversation that included a matter-of-fact discussion of what to do with a man who was sitting 10 feet away and was, by their assessment, no longer a problem worth managing carefully. Arthur Gaines listened to it twice without speaking. And it finished the second time he sat back. And for just a moment, the professional focus dropped and something genuinely human moved across his face. And that's going to be in the first paragraph, he said. And Thomas looked at him. The Tribune will run this. And if the Tribune will run this on the front page, Arthur said, and I will personally hand-deliver copies to 3 National Wire services before I file. He looked at Cole. And you documented everything at the facility before you removed it? And photographed every drawer before it was opened, every document before it was handled, Cole said. And Wick ran through 2 full disposable cameras. I need those photographs developed today. Can you do that?
I know a place in Great Falls.
That opens at 7, Denny said from 2 booths over. He wasn't pretending not to listen. Nobody in the diner was. Great Falls is 90 minutes, Arthur said. I drive fast, Denny said. Get them developed and bring them to me before noon, Arthur said. And don't let them out of your sight. He turned back to Thomas. And your inside source, Sandra Oaks, she's ready to go on record? And she's here for 9 months, Thomas said. And I need to talk to her today. Arthur looked at his recorder, looked at his notes, looked at the manila envelope that Thomas had placed between them on the table 40 minutes into the interview and that had not moved since. In the original survey documents, once I've had a chance to review these, I'm going to recommend they go directly to the EPA contact you have. And today, not tomorrow. They're already in contact, Cole said. Agent was dispatched last night. Arthur looked at Cole. And you called the OIG at 3 in the morning. I called a lot of people at 3 in the morning, Cole said. Them moved across Arthur Gaines's face, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. The expression of a man who has been in this business long enough to know that most stories come to him half assembled and leaking, and recognizes something different when it arrives. Mr. Mercer, he said, I'd like to interview you as well. About tonight, the convoy. Why 164 people drove up a mountain in a blizzard. And he write the story about the families first, Cole said. Hendersons, the Monroes, all of them. Write the story about what was done to them. Everything else is context. Arthur held his gaze for a moment. And he wrote something in his notebook, a single line. Cole couldn't read it from where he was sitting and said, all right. And we do it your way. The federal agent arrived at 8:23. Her name was Diane Cho, and she was 41 years old and had driven through the night from Helena. And she came in the door with the specific, no-nonsense energy of someone who had received an unusual call at 3 in the morning. Indy Shu processed it. Made several of her own calls and arrived at a location with a clear understanding of what she needed to do. She identified herself to Cole, accepted the documents and recording with the careful procedural attention of someone for whom chain of custody was not a formality, but a value, and then sat down with Thomas for 90 minutes. While her colleague, a younger agent named Park, took statements from Denny and Wick about the documentation process at the facility. At one point during Diane Cho's conversation with Thomas, she paused and looked up from her notes. In the facility, she said, you were held there for 12 days. In that time, did anyone enter and exit the building on a regular schedule? Yes, Thomas said, 2 men. One brought food what passed for food. And the other was there the first 3 days and then not again. The one who came regularly, I only ever heard him called Len. And Diane Cho wrote something down. Can you describe him? And Thomas described him. Cho wrote. The other one, she said. And the one in the first 3 days. He was the one who ran the conversation on the recording. Thomas said. His voice was flat, but steady. The voice of someone who has had 12 days to process something and has not finished processing it, but has reached a workable distance from it. He was there to assess whether I was manageable and whether I could be persuaded to hand over the notebook and walk away. And what did he offer you? Money first. Then a version of what happens if I don't cooperate that was framed as concern for my well-being. Thomas's jaw shifted. Anything, Then, when it was clear I wasn't going to give them anything, he left and didn't come back. In which I took to mean the conversation on the recording was what happened after he reported that I wasn't cooperating. And Cho looked at him directly. Mr. Carter, the conversation on the recording. The executives discussing your disposition. How did you manage that? 12 days, knowing that conversation had taken place. Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked at Emily, who was sitting at the end of the booth, with her coffee long cold, listening to her father reconstruct his 12 days with the specific expression of someone who needs to hear it and doesn't want to hear it at the same time. He thought about Emily, Thomas said. Every day, I thought about her memorizing those coordinates. And I thought about whether she'd actually do it, go looking, go to Cole, push until something happened. He paused. And we're 3 days in the middle, where I started to doubt it. And where I started to think I'd miscalculated. Maybe the storm would be too bad, or she'd go to the authorities first and get shut down, or she'd decide that what she'd already done was enough and that I wasn't worth the risk. His voice didn't break. It was too controlled for that, but the control itself communicated everything underneath it. These 3 days were the worst. What brought you back from that? Cho asked. Annie Thomas looked at his daughter. She did, he said. You know how she's built. I know what she decides when she decides something. He reached out and put one hand over Emily's, which had been sitting flat on the table, and Emily turned her hand over and held on. And he'd known since she was 14 years old that if you give Emily Carter a direction and a reason, the only things that stop her are the ones that stop everyone. Emily looked at the table. Her throat moved. I was so angry at you, she said quietly. It wasn't for anyone else in the room, just for him. You know, Thomas said, I kept thinking about what I'd say to you when I found you. I had whole conversations in my head. I had things to tell you about what you put me through. And you can tell me all of it, Thomas said. I'm not going anywhere. Emily looked up at him. You'd better not be, she said. By 9 o'clock, the diner had become something that Patrice would describe for years afterward as the strangest and most alive her place had ever felt. People were eating in shifts. Conversations were happening in 3 languages across 6 booths. Arthur Gaines was in the corner going document one with 2 pens and a yellow legal pad. Agent Cho had commandeered the far table and turned it into a field station. And Denny had left an hour ago for Great Falls with 2 rolls of film in a waterproof bag and a promise to drive fast. And Cole sat alone for the first time all night, just 5 minutes. At the counter, with coffee he wasn't tasting, letting the noise of the room wash around him. Anish Birch sat down beside him. They didn't say anything for almost 2 minutes. That was one of the things Cole valued most about Birch. The man understood that silence after something large was not emptiness to be filled. It was part of the thing itself. Garrett, Cole said finally. He slept in his truck, Birch said. He's still there. He didn't go anywhere. I believe him, Cole said. That he stopped, that he made the right call when it counted. And what do we do with what they have on him? We deal with it, Cole said. And it comes, whatever it is, we deal with it from our side. He drank his coffee. 26. He made a bad decision when he was scared, and then he made a better one when it cost him something. That's more than most people manage, Birch nodded. He turned his coffee cup in a slow circle. What happens now with Pruitt? Inabi Cole had been thinking about this since Pruitt walked out of the diner 3 hours ago. He goes one of 2 directions, he said. He either goes to the people above him and tries to negotiate cover, or he makes a calculation that cover isn't available anymore and he starts looking for the deal that keeps him out of the worst of it. And which one do you think? I think he went up the mountain last night because someone told him to, Cole said. I think he's been doing what someone tells him for years. And I think when that someone figures out that the evidence is already out, they're going to stop taking his calls. He set down his cup, which means Pruitt is going to be standing alone by this time tomorrow. And men standing alone with what he has to lose, they talk. As if to underline this, Agent Cho appeared at Cole's shoulder. "Mr. Mercer," she said, "I wanted to let you know we had a development in the last 30 minutes. And Sheriff Pruitt contacted our field office in Helena at 8:45 this morning requesting a meeting. He indicated he had information relevant to an ongoing investigation and was willing to provide it voluntarily." And Cole looked at her. "He's talking," Cho said. "Professional. I thought you'd want to know." Cole looked at Birch. And Birch looked back at him. "That was faster than you thought," Birch said. Cole said, "It was." He thought about Dale Pruitt, alone in his truck, driving down from that mountain, and he running the numbers, and watching the calculation come out the same way, no matter how many times he ran it. And he thought about a man who had made decisions for years that seemed manageable, because there was always a structure of larger people above him absorbing the risk, and who had just spent the night watching that structure dissolve. He didn't feel sorry for Pruitt. That wasn't in him. But he understood the math. "What does he give you?" Cole asked Cho. "If he talks." "Names," she said simply. "Names above his level." "Authorization chains. Who knew what and when?" She paused. "Mr. Mercer, what Mr. Carter has documented, combined with what we believe, Mr. and Pruitt can give us, is going to reach considerably above North Valley resources." And Cole looked at her. "How far above?" Cho held his gaze for a moment. And she said carefully, "We'll know more when we talk to Pruitt." "And it be. But I'd suggest that the story Mr. Gaines is writing may need a larger frame than North Valley." And she walked back to her table. Cole turned back to the counter. He looked at his coffee. He thought about 23 families. He thought about the Monroe family and their ranch that had been in the same family since 1904. He thought about Ruth Hendricks on the phone at 3 in the morning, saying, "I knew," in a voice that carried 4 years of doubt and anger and grief and the specific exhaustion of being right about something you couldn't prove. And he thought about a girl who had walked 10 miles through a blizzard because her father had told her there was one man who would choose truth over comfort. He thought about how that man, and she, right now, sitting on a diner stool in Miller's Creek at 9 in the morning on a Thursday in January, and he did not feel like someone who had chosen anything particularly remarkable. And he felt like someone who had opened a door because there was a person on the other side of it who needed it opened. And the rest had just been driving. Birch put his hand briefly on Cole's shoulder, one firm contact, no words, and then stood up and went to organize the convoy's return to Gray Haven. Cole finished his coffee. Outside, the storm had finally broken. The Tribune ran the story on Friday morning, not a column, and not a feature buried inside the paper. The front page, above the fold, with Arthur Gaines's byline and a headline that was 17 words long and didn't waste a single one of them. And by noon, it had been picked up by 2 wire services. By 3 in the afternoon, it was on the national evening news, not a brief, not a mention. But a full segment with Thomas Carter's name and the name North Valley Resources and the words deliberate fraud and criminal conspiracy said out loud on television by a network anchor who had spent the morning on the phone with Arthur and Diane Cho and Sandra Oaks. And Cole watched none of it. He was home. And he'd gotten back to Gray Haven at 11 that morning, slept 4 hours in the chair by his wood stove because he was too tired to make it to the bed and woken to the sound of his phone ringing with a number he didn't recognize. He let it ring. It rang again 20 minutes later. He let it ring again. The third time, he picked up. It was a producer from a television network asking if he'd be willing to appear on camera. No, Cole said and hung up. He made coffee, stood at his kitchen window, and looked at the snow. Outside, the storm had left everything covered and still and clean in the way that only happens after a big system moves through, when the world looks briefly like it's been reset. He drank his coffee and thought about nothing in particular, which was a thing he had to work at consciously after a night like the one that had just passed, because his mind kept moving back to specific moments. Emily's face when her father's eyes opened, the sound of the zip ties hitting the floor, Ruth Hendricks saying, "I knew in the dark." Birch called at 2 in the afternoon. "You've seen the news?" he said. And he paused. "Cole, it's everywhere." "Good," Cole said. "That's what it needs to be. The networks are trying to find you. And they won't. Arthur Gaines is asking if you'll do a follow-up interview. Editor wants the convoy angle. He says the story about why 164 bikers went up that mountain is. And tell Arthur the story he already has is the right story," Cole said. "And the families, the land, what was done to them, that's the story." "He knows that's the story," Birch said. "He also knows that most people need a way into a story like that. And something human, something they can grab onto." Cole was quiet for a moment. "And tell him I'll think about it," he said. "That's more than I expected," Birch said. The arrest started 4 days later. Not Pruitt first, that would have been the obvious move, and obvious moves were not what Diane Cho and her team were making. Started at the level above Pruitt, which was a North Valley Resources regional vice president named Marcus Holt. He was arrested on a Tuesday morning at his home in Billings, and who said nothing to the two agents at his door, and nothing in booking, and nothing for the next 17 hours until his lawyer arrived and then said, in quite a lot, most of it about the people above him. Anyone. Cole learned about Holt's arrest from Thomas Carter and called him from the hospital, where Thomas was spending 3 more days under observation, not because he was critical, but because his doctor was the cautious type and had concerns about the infection above his eyebrow and about what 12 days of inadequate nutrition did to a body that had been through significant stress. And Thomas called at 7 in the morning with the specific energy of a man who has been lying in a hospital bed waiting for something to happen and has just received the phone call confirming that it has. "Holt," Thomas said. "They got Holt, I heard," Cole said. "Talking." Thomas said this with a particular emphasis, not satisfaction exactly. And like the sound of a structure finally doing what it was built to do. His lawyer negotiated cooperation this morning. Cole Holt's testimony goes above North Valley. And there's a state official, 2 of them, actually, and a federal contractor who processed the environmental reports. And the falsification wasn't just North Valley running their own scheme. And they paid into a system that was already in place. A system that had been running longer than anyone knew. Cole sat down at his kitchen table. "How much longer?" he said. "It is saying 12 years, Thomas said. 12 years, Cole. And North Valley was the largest client, but there were others. Other companies, other communities, other families." He paused. Energy in his voice had shifted. The forward momentum of a man following a thread had given way to something heavier and more complicated. "And we opened something bigger than I thought." Cole thought about this. And he thought about the 14 families he had called in the middle of the night, and then he thought about the fact that there were apparently other communities, any other families he didn't know about yet, and who had been living with the same manufactured contamination and the same forced displacement, and the same 4 years of guilt and doubt and the slow grief of believing a lie. Are you all right? Cole asked. A pause. I don't know yet, Thomas said honestly. And he thought when the arrest started, I'd feel... He stopped. He thought it would feel more finished, but it just feels bigger. Every answer opens a door to a larger room. That's what happens when you find a real thing, Cole said. It's never as contained as you hoped. Emily said the same thing, Thomas said. And he almost word for word. Smart woman, Cole said. Thomas made a sound that was approximately a laugh. And she gets it from her mother, he said. And the warmth in his voice when he said it was the warmth of a man who has been very close to losing everything and is still seedy 3 days later and recalibrating to the reality that he didn't. And the second arrest came Thursday, then 3 more the following Monday. And the state official Thomas had mentioned a man named Gerald Foss, who had served as the deputy director of Montana's Department of Environmental Quality for 9 years, was arrested on Wednesday of the following week. And that arrest was the one that broke the story open at the national level in a way that the earlier arrests hadn't quite managed. State official, a government position, a man who had been reviewing environmental reports and signing off on them and accepting money to ensure that certain reports said what certain companies needed them to say. And the story was no longer about North Valley Resources. It was about a system. Arthur Gaines called Cole the morning of Fosse's arrest. I need to ask you something, Arthur said. Go ahead. In the convoy that night, you've said the families are the story. And you're right. And they're the center of it. But Cole, the investigation is expanding. There are going to be congressional hearings. There are going to be other journalists, less careful ones, who are going to write whatever version of that night makes the most dramatic copy. And I'd rather the accurate version be on record. Cole was quiet for a moment. What do you want to know? Why did they follow you? Arthur said. Strategically, not the reasoning. I've got the reasoning. What did you say to them? 164 people at 2 a.m. in a blizzard. And did you say? I told them the truth, Cole said. And I told them what the girl told me. And then I told them I was going and that nobody had to come. And they all came. Not all of them, Cole said. And 6 stayed back to run the supply route to the northern families. That was the right call, too. But 164. They didn't come because of what I said, Cole said. They came because of who they are. They've been doing supply runs in this county for 19 years. And they've carried insulin through 3-foot snowdrifts. They've rebuilt houses. They've sat with people who had nobody else sitting with them. His voice was steady and level, not modest factual. A man was missing. His daughter walked 10 miles to ask for help. And the question wasn't whether to go. The question was whether we could get there in time. And Arthur was silent for a moment. Cole could hear him writing. I'm going to quote you directly, Arthur said. That's fine, Cole said. The article ran Sunday. It was long, 4,000 words, the kind of piece that newspapers were increasingly reluctant to publish because the economics of long journalism had become difficult. But which Arthur's editor had approved, because there were moments when a story was large enough that length was the only honest form. Inch green. Cole read it at his kitchen table with his second cup of coffee and said nothing afterward for a long time. He thought Thomas's name should have been larger. He said so when Thomas called that afternoon. Innate aim is exactly where it should be, Thomas said. You haven't seen the op-ed yet. What op-ed? I wrote one, Thomas said. It'll run Tuesday. It's not about the investigation. It's about the families, about what 4 years of living with a manufactured lie does to people. And it cost the Monroes what it cost Ruth Hendricks. A pause. And it cost my daughter Emily, Cole said. She didn't know, Thomas said. I didn't tell her I was investigating this. I kept it from her because I thought I was protecting her. The weight in his voice was something he wasn't trying to hide. And she found out the same time everything else happened. And she's been gracious about it, which is more than I deserve. And she's been mad about it, Cole said. Simultaneously, Thomas said. He paused. She told me last night that she's decided to continue the work. In the environmental investigation work, she's been accepted to a program in Missoula investigative journalism, Environmental Focus. And she starts in the fall. Cole looked at his kitchen window. Outside, the snow was still there, and thinner now as the week had progressed, and the world beginning to reappear beneath it. And of course she is, he said. The congressional hearing was scheduled for March. And Thomas testified for 3 hours. Emily sat 2 rows behind him in the gallery and watched him the way you watch someone you love doing something that costs them fully, specifically, not looking away from any of it. See, Sandra Oaks testified the following day. In 14 months of documentation, delivered in the measured, clear voice of someone who had been preparing this testimony in her head since the day she left North Valley and had finally been given a room large enough to say it in. 3 of the displaced families testified. The Monroe family sent their eldest daughter, a woman of 62 who had grown up on the ranch and whose grandfather had built the main house, and who stood at the microphone and said, in a voice that didn't shake because she had decided it wouldn't, that she wanted the committee to understand something before she gave her testimony, that the harm done to her family was not primarily financial, and that the money they'd been given for the land could not buy back what the land had meant. And you could not compensate 3 generations of a family for the lie that they had been living in a poisoned place and had done the right thing by leaving. Did the right thing by staying, she said. They made us believe we hadn't. And that's what I need this committee to understand. They didn't just take our land. They made us doubt our own judgment about the ground we'd been standing on our whole lives. And the room was very quiet when she finished. Cole wasn't there. And he watched it on the news that night, alone at his kitchen table. And when the Monroe woman finished speaking, he reached over and turned off the television and sat in the quiet for a while. In April, Ruth Hendricks called him. He'd given her his number the night of the diner when he'd handed the phone to Thomas. And she'd kept it for 3 months without using it. And when she finally called, she said she'd been thinking about what to say for most of those 3 months and had decided to stop thinking and just say it. My husband and I went back, she said, to the land. And last week, Cole waited. The county issued an official declaration that the contamination findings were fraudulent. Came through quietly. I don't think most people noticed. But we got a letter. Her voice was doing the thing it had done on the phone in the diner, operating just at the edge of its capacity. And we went back and we walked the property, all of it. And Robert walked every acre, and I watched him, and I thought about every morning for 4 years when he woke up and didn't say anything. But I knew he was thinking about that land. And the way he'd go quiet when we drove past ranches that looked like ours used to look. And what did he do? Cole asked when he finished walking it. He sat down, Ruth said, right in the middle of the north field, and just sat down on the ground, and I went and sat next to him. She paused. We sat there for a long time. Cole said nothing. And that story didn't need anything added to it. I called to say thank you, Ruth said. You know, Thomas did the work. I know he was the one who found the evidence. But you're the reason it got out. You're the reason somebody came. She paused once more. And my husband wants to know, and I know this might sound like a strange question, but He wants to know if the Hell's Angels would come to a barbecue. Cole was quiet for 1 second. Then when? July Ruth said. And the weather's right. We're going to have people over. The families, the ones who are coming back. And we'd like, her voice softened. And we'd like the people who came for us to come celebrate with us. And we'll be there, Cole said. He hung up the phone. He sat at his kitchen table in April in Greyhaven, Montana, and thought about a woman and her husband sitting in the middle of a field that had always been theirs, and ground that was never poisoned. In the silence of something, I finally returned. And the summer came. The July barbecue happened on a Saturday, with weather that cooperated in the way Montana weather cooperates in July, completely and without apology. In the sky, the specific blue that only shows up above 8,000 feet. It makes people who see it for the first time understand and immediately why other people refuse to leave. And 73 of the 164 came. And the others sent word. Cole stood at the edge of the north field with a plate of food he wasn't eating and watched what was happening around him. Families and bikers in the same space, and the thing that struck him most was how quick that stopped being a notable observation, how fast people who had never met found the same wavelength. And because the ground they were standing on had a story they all shared, and shared stories have a way of collapsing. The distance between people who might otherwise never have found their way to the same field. And Thomas Carter was there. He looked better, not fully recovered. He'd told Cole privately that some things were going to take longer than he'd initially calculated. The body had its own timeline for processing what had happened to it, but present and warm and engaged in a way that communicated health at its most fundamental level. Emily was there. She found Cole at the edge of the field, because that was where Cole was. He had a habit of standing at the edges of things, not because he was uncomfortable with the center, but because the edge was where you could see the whole. Stood beside him, without saying anything for a moment. And she'd cut her hair since January. She looked less like someone who had survived something, and more like someone who had integrated it, carried it forward into what came next, instead of being stopped by it. And my program starts September 15th, she said. And Thomas told me, environmental investigative journalism. She said it the way you say the name of a thing that still slightly surprises you, even though you chose it. Didn't know that was a path until. She gestured vaguely at the field around them. All of it. It was always a path, Cole said. You just needed the map. Emily looked at him. That's a generous way to put it. It's an accurate way to put it. She was quiet for a moment. And then, I've been trying to figure out what to say to you. We've had 6 months, and I still haven't landed on it. You don't need to say anything. I know I don't need to, she said. I want to. She looked out at the field, at her father standing 40 feet away talking to Robert Hendricks with the easy warmth of two men who have been through something together and found each other on the other side of it. And you could have said no that night. You could have heard everything I told you and decided it wasn't your problem. And you could have given me a warm meal and a phone and sent me back to Billings. Could have, Cole said. Why didn't you? Cole thought about it. And he thought about Emily coming through the door, the way she'd gone down, the way her hand had stayed locked around the notebook, the specific quality of what he'd seen in her eyes when she'd looked up at him on the floor. And just fear, not just desperation, something more stubborn than either. And something that recognized him before he'd said a word. And your father said I was the only man who would choose truth over comfort, Cole said. And I've thought about that a lot since January, whether it's true, and whether it's a compliment or just description of someone too stubborn to take the easy road. He looked at the field. I think the honest answer is that I looked at you on that floor and I understood exactly what you'd already done to get there. And I thought if she can do that, I can at least drive a truck. Emily was quiet for a long moment. He was right about you, she said finally. He was right about you too, Cole said. She nodded. He looked at her father again. Thomas had caught her eye across the field, and Tom was giving her the small, specific smile of a parent who is watching their child become whatever they're becoming and finding it exactly right. Emily smiled back, and then she turned to Cole one more time and said, next time I knock on your door, because I want you to know, there will be a next time, because the work doesn't stop next time I knock. And you say, Indy am. Cole looked at her. He thought about 164 people in a blizzard. He thought about a padlock on a county road. He thought about Pruitt walking out of Patrice's diner and the 3 seconds of silence before the clapping started. He thought about Ruth Hendricks sitting in a field that was always hers, finally knowing that it was. Same answer as last time, he said. Emily nodded once. Satisfied, like a woman who had come to confirm something she already knew and was now free to move forward. And she pat back toward her father. She walked back toward her father. Cole stood and watched the whole wide thing, the family's return to land that was always theirs, the men who had come for them now sitting beside them in the sun, and the specific human sound of people eating together and talking and laughing in a place where 6 months ago, a manufactured lie had been the loudest thing. And the truth had been buried in these mountains for 4 years. It had taken one man willing to look for it, one daughter willing to carry it, and 164 people willing to follow a whisper into the dark. And that was exactly enough.